I never thought a neighborhood could be war-torn, but apparently mine could. The first time I realized HOA meetings were not just boring, I sat in my little folding chair in the community center, expecting maybe some talk about landscaping fees or recycling schedules. Instead, I walked into what felt like a courtroom drama directed by a soap opera director on espresso. It started innocently enough. Mrs. Henderson, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, was holding court. Her voice, sharp as a whip, cut across the room as she announced, "We have a serious issue with the Johnsons' mailbox. It's crooked." Yes, crooked. A crooked mailbox. My brain did a triple take. Were we going to discuss global warming or crooked mailboxes? Apparently, the latter warranted a full investigation. I tried to shrink into my chair, silently hoping no one would notice the new guy in the corner. That was me. I had moved in 3 weeks ago, bright-eyed and ready to finally enjoy a peaceful street. But apparently, peace is not part of the HOA vocabulary. Then came the first warning that I was in deep trouble. A man named Frank, short, stocky, and terrifyingly punctual, pointed directly at me, or maybe he just happened to be gesturing wildly, and said, "New neighbor, do you know about the garden rules?" My heart skipped a beat. "Garden rules?" I stammered. I planted flowers." Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "Flowers, yes, but are they approved flowers? Did you submit the form?" My palms started sweating. Forms? I had forms. I thought this was a neighborhood, not the Department of Agriculture. As the meeting continued, I realized there were levels to this madness. Someone complained that Mr. Lee's lawn gnome was facing the wrong way. Another resident passionately argued that the color of his house was mildly offensive to the general aesthetic of the cul-de-sac. I laughed nervously, but no one else did. Apparently, this was serious business. Then it got personal. "And what about your fence?" Mrs. Henderson snapped at me like a hawk spotting a mouse. "Is it the correct height? Does it comply with the community guidelines? Do you even know the bylaws?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, the room erupted in nods and murmurs as if my fence, or lack of knowledge about it, was the scandal of the century. At that moment, I realized, this was not just about mailboxes or gnomes. This was about control, power, who got to decide what normal looked like on our street, and I unwittingly had walked into enemy territory. I tried to make a joke to lighten the tension. "Well, if crooked mailboxes are a crime, I guess we're all guilty of something." A few chuckles escaped, but mostly I got cold stares. Humor, I learned, was dangerous here, unless it aligned perfectly with the HOA Code of Conduct. By the time the meeting ended, I was exhausted and slightly paranoid. My mailbox, my flowers, even my sense of humor had been scrutinized, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the real drama hadn't even started yet. Because just as I was about to leave, Mrs. Henderson turned to me, her smile slow and calculated. "Oh, new neighbor," she said, tilting her head like she knew a secret I didn't. "You'll fit right in or you won't." I froze, the words hung in the air like a warning bell. I had no idea what I had signed up for. And deep down, I suspected the next time I walked into that meeting, things were going to get a lot messier. Little did I know, the crooked mailbox was just the beginning. The next day, I stared at my mailbox like it had betrayed me. I half expected it to be watching me back, crooked and smug. But no, it was just there, innocently upright, mocking me. Still, my mind kept replaying Mrs. Henderson's words. "You'll fit right in or you won't." Curiosity, or maybe stupidity, drove me back to the community center. I had to know what I was getting into. I arrived early, hopping to observe quietly, maybe take mental notes, maybe, just maybe blend in. But blending in was not on the agenda. The moment I walked in, Frank, the short, stocky, terrifyingly punctual man from last time, made a beeline for me. His handshake was firm, the kind that feels like an interrogation. "Welcome back," he said, a little too casually, "but you should know we've noticed some irregularities." "Irregularities?" I asked, forcing a laugh. "Like flowers." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Worse, your garbage cans." I blinked. Garbage cans. My eyes must have screamed disbelief because he nodded solemnly as if he had uncovered a national scandal. "Placement matters," he whispered. "And timing. Late trash, early trash, it's a violation." I wanted to run, but I didn't. Somehow, my feet glued themselves to the linoleum floor. This was starting to feel like a horror movie set in suburbia. The meeting began, and it became immediately clear that I had underestimated the HOA's capacity for drama. Mrs. Henderson was in full command mode, clipboard in hand, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose like a general inspecting troops. She announced, "We will now review all pending violations." Someone, probably a martyr, stood up and reported a tire swing that was allegedly too cheerful. Another claimed that the Johnsons' hydrangeas were offensive to the neighborhood symmetry. I scribbled notes furiously in my little notebook, trying to make sense of this new reality. Then came the part that made me question everything: the welcome new neighbor segment. I had assumed it would be brief, maybe a handshake, a few pleasantries. Wrong. This was a ritual of scrutiny. Mrs. Henderson asked me about my mailbox alignment, the height of my fence, my flower choices, and even the angle at which I retrieved my mail. I laughed nervously. I just put it there. Her eyes narrowed. "Placement is intentional, isn't it? There's a method to every violation." A method. I wanted to disappear. My mailbox was a crime scene. But it wasn't just me. Over the course of the meeting, I realized this HOA ran on fear, spectacle, and subtle intimidation. Neighbors whispered behind hands, and some laughed nervously at jokes that weren't funny. Everyone had a secret worry that Mrs. Henderson would find fault with. And now, apparently, I was the prime candidate for a full-scale audit. Then came the final twist of the evening. Mrs. Henderson tapped her gavel, yes, an actual tiny gavel, and smiled. And finally, the most pressing issue: someone has been leaving mysterious notes around the neighborhood. I froze. Mysterious notes. My imagination immediately conjured visions of angry post-it messages, cryptic warnings, even handwritten threats tucked into mail slots. Mrs. Henderson continued, "No one knows who it is, but whoever it is, they are disrupting our perfect community, and we will find them." The room went silent. Eyes darted suspiciously, heads turned, fingers pointed sometimes at the obvious culprits, sometimes at random neighbors. My heart pounded in my chest. Could they be talking about me? I hadn't left any notes yet. Frank leaned toward me again, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Be careful," he murmured. "In this neighborhood, even a smile can be a crime." As I walked home that night, I passed my mailbox, still perfectly upright. I wanted to laugh, but I felt a creeping sense of dread. Something bigger was happening, and I was smack in the middle of it. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was watching, waiting, and maybe planning its next move. Because if I thought crooked mailboxes were the worst thing in this neighborhood, I was about to be proven very, very wrong. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Mrs. Henderson's piercing glare and Frank's conspiratorial whispers about my garbage cans. And those mysterious notes, they haunted me. Who was leaving them? Was it some harmless prank, or something far worse? My imagination ran wild, conjuring all sorts of scenarios that probably belonged in a thriller movie rather than a quiet suburban cul-de-sac. The next morning, I went outside to check my mailbox. Nothing unusual. Just the usual assortment of bills, flyers, and junk mail. But as I turned to head inside, I noticed a small, neatly folded piece of paper lying in the grass near my driveway. My heart skipped a beat. I picked it up cautiously. On it, in perfectly neat handwriting, was a single sentence: "We're watching." I dropped it, not because I was scared, well, maybe a little, but because it felt surreal. Who leaves notes like this? And more importantly, why me? By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, I had convinced myself of one thing: I was officially a target. And not the fun, friendly kind, like a neighbor inviting you over for lemonade. No, the kind where your every move is judged, criticized, and dissected by a self-appointed neighborhood tribunal. When I arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. Neighbors whispered in clusters, eyes darting suspiciously. I half expected them to search my car for hidden violations. Mrs. Henderson, of course, was already at the front, clipboard in hand, radiating the kind of authority that made dictators seem approachable by comparison. Before anyone could even settle, she pointed at me. "New neighbor," she said, her tone like velvet wrapped around a blade. "Did you receive one of these notes?" My stomach dropped. Yes, I admitted, holding up the tiny piece of paper. "Good," she said, smiling in a way that felt more like a threat than encouragement. "Now we know it's affecting the right people." I wanted to speak up, to say that I had no idea who was leaving these notes. But before I could, Frank leaned in, whispering, "Careful what you say. This neighborhood has rules." Rules? Yes, I was starting to understand. They were invisible, unspoken, and terrifyingly strict. And apparently, I was on the wrong side of all of them. Then Mrs. Henderson announced something that made my jaw drop. "We're forming a neighborhood watch committee to get to the bottom of this note situation." Committee? That sounded harmless at first, until she added, "And new neighbors are encouraged to participate." My heart sank. Participation meant involvement, investigation, responsibility, exposure. This was no longer a casual community, it was a battlefield, and I was being drafted. Over the next hour, chaos unfolded in slow motion. People debated the motives behind the notes, theories flew like confetti, and accusations bounced around the room like a game of pinball. One neighbor swore the notes were a message from someone from outside trying to undermine the HOA. Another insisted it was a prank by teenagers. Meanwhile, Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly at every dramatic declaration, clearly savoring the tension. I tried to stay out of the fray, quietly jotting down observations. My notebook rapidly filled with names, complaints, and tiny sketches of suspicious mailboxes. Somehow, I had become part detective, part diplomat, and entirely terrified citizen. Then came the kicker. As the meeting was winding down, someone noticed a fresh note pinned to the community bulletin board. Everyone froze. I approached cautiously. It read, "Step carefully. Some secrets are closer than you think." The room erupted into whispers, gasps, and urgent speculation. And all I could think was, this isn't about mailboxes, hydrangeas, or fences anymore. This is something bigger, something personal. As I walked home that evening, clutching my notebook like a shield, I realized something terrifying. The crooked mailbox, the gnome, even the hydrangeas, they were just the surface. The HOA had a layer underneath, a web of secrets, power plays, and subtle intimidation. And somehow, I was in the center of it. I glanced at my house as the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows stretching long across the lawn. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was waiting, watching, maybe even planning the next move. And I had no idea if I was ready for it. By the time I woke up the next morning, I was officially paranoid. Every leaf blowing across my yard looked like a potential warning. Every neighbor walking by seemed like a secret agent. And my mailbox, well, it now felt like a surveillance camera with a crooked sense of humor. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a prank. Maybe Mrs. Henderson and her committee were making mountains out of molehills. Maybe, just maybe, I was turning into the neighborhood conspiracy theorist. But that morning, as I stepped outside, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. There, etched faintly into the dirt by my driveway, were footprints that weren't mine. Small, neat, purposeful, someone had been there. My heart started racing. Was it the note leaver? Or worse, was it someone from the HOA checking if I was compliant before the next meeting? I considered calling the police, but something told me that would only escalate things. No, this had to be handled carefully. Subtly, like a secret agent, only much less cool. When the next HOA meeting rolled around, the energy in the room was electric. Neighbors arrived early, whispering in tight clusters, eyes darting suspiciously. Mrs. Henderson, as always, was the conductor of this orchestra of tension, clipboard clutched like a weapon. Good morning, she began, voice silky but dangerous. It seems our little mystery has escalated. She held up a note, identical to the ones that had been showing up around the neighborhood. Everyone leaned in. This, she said, tapping the paper, was left on the Johnsons' doorstep last night. And the message, watch your step. A shiver ran down my spine. Watch my step. I looked down at my shoes. Did my sneakers look suspicious? Did my laces need approval? I felt eyes on me. Probably they were imagining I'd leave the next note. Or maybe I had already unknowingly become the villain in this suburban drama. Mrs. Henderson continued, we must catch whoever is doing this. It's disrupting our harmony. Harmony. I almost laughed. Harmony in this neighborhood was as real as a unicorn mowing your lawn. The meeting quickly turned into a full-scale investigation. Frank, our unofficial HOA enforcer, started taking statements. Neighbors were asked to recount their evening routines, where they walked, who they saw, and even, this part terrified me, what time they checked their mail. I sat silently, praying they wouldn't notice my notebook filled with sketches of footprints and marginal doodles of my mailbox. Then someone dropped a bomb. I saw someone near the Hendersons' house last night, could have been them. All eyes shifted. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I realized that in this neighborhood, suspicion was a weapon more powerful than any gavel. I tried to act casual, leaning back in my chair, taking slow breaths. But my mind was racing. What if I was accused next? What if those footprints led straight to my front door? My paranoia had gone from imagination to full-blown reality. Then came the breaking point. Mrs. Henderson's eyes locked onto mine, narrowing like a cat about to pounce. New neighbor, she said slowly, deliberately, have you noticed anything unusual? My stomach sank. Unusual, like notes, footprints, a suspiciously crooked mailbox. I swallowed hard, trying to sound nonchalant. Just normal neighborhood things. My voice sounded far too shaky even to my own ears. She smiled, a slow, calculated smile. Good, keep observing, pay attention. We wouldn't want anyone to miss something important, would we? The entire room seemed to hum with tension after that. Neighbors glanced at each other nervously. I could feel my pulse in my ears. I wanted to run, hide, maybe move to a place without HOA meetings, clipboard dictators, and ominous notes. But it was too late. I was in this, fully, whether I liked it or not. By the time I got home that evening, dusk had fallen, and the shadows in my yard stretched long and threatening. I stepped lightly, half expecting the footprints to appear again, half expecting some message pinned to my mailbox, half expecting, well, I didn't even know what. And then I saw it. A single, folded piece of paper, pinned under the mailbox flag. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It read, "Tomorrow, everything changes." My heart stopped. My mind raced. Who had written this? What did it mean? And most importantly, was I ready for it? I wasn't sure. But I had a feeling that tomorrow, nothing in my quiet suburban life would ever feel normal again. I barely slept that night. Every creak in the house sounded like someone sneaking past my windows. Every gust of wind made me jump. And that note, "Tomorrow, everything changes," was burned into my brain like a neon warning sign. I spent the entire morning walking my property in circles, inspecting my mailbox, my lawn, even the hydrangeas. Nothing. Everything was exactly how I had left it. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By the time I got to the HOA meeting that afternoon, my nerves were shot. I could practically feel the tension radiating off every neighbor like static electricity. The room buzzed with low murmurs, but no one dared speak until Mrs. Henderson finally cleared her throat. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the room like a hawk spotting prey. "We have a very important issue to address today. It seems our note situation has escalated, and unfortunately, our investigation has reached a turning point." I froze. A turning point. That sounded serious, very serious. My palms started sweating. She continued, Someone has been caught on camera near the Henderson property last night." The room gasped. Every head turned toward me instinctively. My brain screamed, "Not me, not me, I didn't even own a camera." Mrs. Henderson held up a printout from a security camera, grainy footage, black and white, shadows in the night. My stomach sank. The figure was short, hunched slightly, and suspiciously close to my mailbox. I felt every eye in the room on me. The tension was suffocating. I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came out. What could I say? "I swear, that's not me, even though it looks exactly like me in the grainy shadows." Then Frank, ever the vigilant watchdog, leaned over and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "You need to prove you weren't involved. Otherwise." He let the threat hang in the air. The meeting quickly erupted into chaos. Neighbors speculated wildly. Could it be a prankster, a rival HOA member, someone from outside? And of course, Mrs. Henderson nodded thoughtfully at every dramatic suggestion, clearly savoring the suspense. I tried to explain that I had been home all night, but that only made me sound guilty. Apparently, in HOA investigations, innocence is just another layer of suspicion. Then, the unthinkable happened. Mrs. Henderson announced, "We've decided to form a task force to confront this individual directly." Task force, confront directly. My stomach dropped. Were they planning to drag some poor soul in front of the entire neighborhood? To interrogate, humiliate, maybe even fine them for crimes against suburban harmony? And somehow, I had the uneasy feeling I might be the prime suspect. By the time the meeting ended, I was both terrified and exhausted. My only consolation was the thought that maybe I could disappear into my house until this all blew over. But as I approached my driveway, I noticed something chilling. The front gate, usually locked, was slightly ajar. I hadn't touched it, and pinned to the latch was another note. Hands trembling, I unfolded it. It said, "Meet me at the cul-de-sac at midnight. Come alone." I laughed nervously. Only it wasn't funny. My heart pounded. This was no longer about crooked mailboxes, gnomes, or hydrangeas. This was something else, something dangerous, something personal. I debated ignoring it. Call the police? Maybe. Tell the HOA? Definitely not. They would probably fine me for not showing up. But my gut told me that if I didn't go, I'd regret it. And if I did, well, who knew what awaited me in the shadows of my quiet suburban street? That night, I stared at the clock, the minutes dragging like hours. When it finally struck 11:59, I grabbed a flashlight, my jacket, and my courage, or what was left of it, and stepped outside into the cold, silent street. Every shadow felt like it was watching me. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. And as I approached the cul-de-sac, I saw something that made me freeze in place. A figure standing perfectly still, bathed in the dim glow of the streetlight, and in their hand, another note. I swallowed hard. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it from 10 feet away. And then, in a voice that sent chills down my spine, the figure said, "Welcome to the real HOA." The street was silent except for the faint hum of the streetlights. I froze, staring at the figure under the dim glow, heart hammering like a jackhammer. "Welcome to the real HOA," they had said. My mind raced. Was this a prank, some overzealous neighbor, or had I finally stumbled into something darker? I took a cautious step forward. Hello." My voice came out higher than intended, cracking like a teenage boy. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, holding that note like it was a declaration of war. I squinted, trying to make out their face. Finally, the figure stepped forward into the light. And it was Frank. Of course it was Frank. Of course. My unofficial HOA enforcer had the kind of smirk that made me want to run and hide simultaneously. "Frank," I asked, trying to sound casual, is this really necessary?" He chuckled, low and menacing. "Necessary? Absolutely. The neighborhood has rules, and rules must be enforced." He held up the note. "You received this, right? That's your first test. To see if you pay attention. To see if you understand the seriousness of our community." I swallowed hard. Seriousness about mailboxes and garbage cans. I tried to joke, but the humor died halfway out of my mouth. He didn't laugh. "No, new neighbor," he said, stepping closer. "It's about compliance, observation, participation. The real HOA isn't just about meetings or fines, it's about knowing the system, following it, living it." My stomach turned. Living it. I had barely survived 3 meetings. How was I supposed to live this? Then he handed me the note. I hesitated, opening it slowly. Inside was a list of tasks. Check the hedges, align the garden gnomes, review the mailboxes for crookedness, and report back on any suspicious activity in the neighborhood. "Consider this orientation," Frank said. "If you do well, you stay. If not well, let's just say you'll regret it." Orientation, I laughed nervously. Orientation for a HOA. He didn't respond. He just turned and walked toward the shadows, disappearing almost immediately. I stood there, frozen, notebook in hand, wondering if I had officially joined some secret HOA militia. Over the next week, I tried to follow the instructions on the note without drawing attention. I checked every mailbox, counted every gnome, and even peeked into my neighbors' yards like some suburban spy. I avoided eye contact whenever possible, praying that Mrs. Henderson wouldn't notice my frantic attempts at compliance. But things escalated fast. Every evening, another note appeared somewhere in the neighborhood, each with increasingly cryptic instructions. Check the Johnsons' hydrangeas for irregular growth patterns. Make sure the tire swing is aligned perfectly north-south. Monitor the trash bins for late placement. I was exhausted. My life had become a bizarre game of stealth, precision, and paranoia. And just when I thought I had survived, the real twist came. One night, I was checking the cul-de-sac for suspicious activity, because of course that had become part of my life, when I noticed a shadow moving across my neighbor's lawn. I froze, heart pounding. Could it be a note leaver, another HOA enforcer, or worse, a criminal? I crept closer, flashlight trembling in my hand. The shadow moved faster. I stepped forward and saw Mrs. Henderson. Yes, Mrs. Henderson herself, crouched near the Johnsons' mailbox, scribbling furiously on a note. I blinked. Was this a trap, an ambush, or had I just discovered the mastermind behind all of this? Before I could react, she looked up, and our eyes met. "Ah," she said, smiling like she had been expecting me. "You're paying attention, aren't you?" My brain short-circuited. She stood slowly, holding the note as if it were a weapon. "The real HOA," she said, voice smooth and dangerous, "only reveals its secrets to those it trusts. And now you're about to find out just how deep this goes." My pulse raced. I wanted to run. I wanted to hide. I wanted to pretend I had never moved to this neighborhood. But it was too late. The game had begun, and I was right in the middle of it. And as Mrs. Henderson stepped closer, I realized the crooked mailbox, the mysterious notes, even Frank's nighttime orientation. None of it had prepared me for what was coming next. The next day, I barely left my house. My nerves were shot, my coffee intake had tripled, and every shadow seemed like it was conspiring against me. I couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Henderson crouched near the Johnsons' mailbox, scribbling notes as if she were orchestrating some secret war. And now, I was apparently enlisted in her army. By the time evening rolled around, I had no choice. Another note had appeared, pinned neatly under my mailbox flag, like a ticking time bomb of suburban terror. My hands shook as I unfolded it. "Tonight, the final test begins. Be ready, be alone, and remember, observe everything." Observe everything. My life had officially become a surreal combination of Big Brother and a scavenger hunt from hell. I stepped outside at precisely 11:59, flashlight in hand, notebook in pocket. The cul-de-sac was eerily quiet, only the occasional rustle of leaves breaking the silence. I shivered, but not from the cold, from the tension, from the feeling that at any moment something or someone was about to move in the shadows. Then I saw them. Frank and Mrs. Henderson, standing side by side under the dim streetlight, their faces unreadable. Between them, a small table held a stack of notes, clipboards, and what appeared to be miniature garden gnomes. "Welcome," Mrs. Henderson said, her tone deceptively calm. "You've made it this far, new neighbor, most don't." I swallowed hard. I think I'm ready, my voice cracked. I think. Frank smirked. "We'll see." The test began immediately. They handed me a clipboard and a map of the neighborhood, marked with tiny red X's. "Your job," Mrs. Henderson said, "is to identify every violation, actual or potential, before we return. And remember, the neighborhood is watching." The map felt heavy in my hands. Every house suddenly seemed like a battlefield. Every lawn, every mailbox, every gnome, every trash can become a potential trap. I started my rounds cautiously, noting tiny discrepancies in alignment, small cracks in fences, even minor variations in flower height. Each discovery made me more paranoid, more tense, and yet more exhilarated. Somehow, the absurdity of it all mixed with the danger was intoxicating. Then, midway through my survey, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow darted across my neighbor's yard. I froze. Could it be another note leaver? Another enforcer? My pulse skyrocketed. I crept closer, flashlight shaking, and saw a neighbor I barely knew holding a note. They looked startled to see me. I wasn't," they began. Before they could finish, Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through the night like a blade. "Observation is key," she said, appearing seemingly out of nowhere. "And sometimes, the smallest actions tell the biggest story." I realized in that moment that the HOA wasn't just a neighborhood association. It was an institution, a system, a machine of subtle power and control, and I was inside it fully, whether I liked it or not. By the time I returned to the cul-de-sac, my notebook overflowing with observations, Mrs. Henderson inspected it carefully. Frank leaned in, nodding with approval at some of my notes, frowning at others. "You're learning," Mrs. Henderson said, finally allowing a small smile. "But there's one final lesson." My stomach dropped. One final lesson. I had survived meetings, notes, tasks, and midnight encounters. What could possibly be left? Then she handed me a note. Not just any note, this one was different. The handwriting was sharper, more deliberate. "Trust no one. The true violation is closer than you think." I looked around nervously. Frank gave me a cryptic glance. Neighbors' windows glimmered with light, but no one moved. The shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, and more menacing. I don't understand," I stammered. Mrs. Henderson's eyes glinted. "You will, tomorrow everything changes. The HOA is more than rules, more than notes, its power. And now you're part of it or against it. Choose wisely." I felt the weight of the words pressing down on me. My quiet suburban life, my mailbox, my gnomes, even my sanity, everything was on the line. And deep down, I knew that by the time the sun rose, nothing would ever be the same. I walked home that night, my flashlight trembling in my hand, every shadow now a threat, every rustle of leaves a warning. And I realized something terrifying. The HOA hadn't just pulled me into their world, they had changed it. And me, along with it. By the time I closed my front door, I knew one thing for certain. The final part of this suburban saga would reveal everything. The sun rose over the cul-de-sac like nothing had happened. Birds chirped cheerfully, kids rode bikes, and yet I knew the neighborhood had changed. I had changed. The crooked mailboxes, the mysterious notes, the midnight tests, it all had led to this final day. I arrived at the community center for what I feared would be the ultimate confrontation. Mrs. Henderson was already there, clipboard in hand, looking exactly like she had been waiting for me since the day I moved in. Frank was beside her, standing like a sentinel, arms crossed, and eyes sharper than a hawk's. "Good morning," Mrs. Henderson said, voice smooth as silk. "Welcome to your final lesson in HOA living." My heart pounded. Final lesson. I had survived notes, orientation, suspicious neighbors, and endless rounds of observation. Could there possibly be anything left to teach me? The room fell silent as she continued. Today, we reveal the truth behind the mysterious notes, the investigations, and the disruptions to our harmony. I swallowed hard. Truth, I had been waiting for this moment for weeks, yet fear made my throat dry. She gestured to a table covered with notes, maps, and photographs. Everything you've observed, every violation you've recorded, every footstep you've noticed, has led to this moment. But the real question is, will you survive the final test? I nodded weakly. I think so. Frank stepped forward. It's simple. The true HOA test is not about mailboxes, gnomes, or fences. It's about trust, observation, and knowing that sometimes the smallest actions carry the greatest consequences. I frowned. Trust. Mrs. Henderson smiled. Yes, trust no one, not even your neighbors, not even yourself. She handed me one last note. My hands shook as I opened it. It read, walk to the center of the cul-de-sac. Look around, observe carefully. The final decision awaits. I felt my pulse in my throat. I stepped outside, my notebook in hand, scanning the familiar street that had transformed into a minefield of suspicion and intrigue. Every mailbox, every gnome, every leaf on every lawn seemed to scream, you're being watched. When I reached the center of the cul-de-sac, the neighborhood was silent. The air was thick with tension. And then I saw them. Every neighbor was gathered around, peering from behind windows, standing on porches, whispering, watching. And at the front of the crowd, Mrs. Henderson and Frank waited, expressions unreadable. Congratulations, Mrs. Henderson said. You've survived the tests. You've observed, documented, and endured, but there's one final truth. I braced myself. The HOA, she continued, is not about control. It's about community, harmony, and yes, sometimes, a little drama to keep everyone alert. I blinked. Wait, drama, was this it? All those nights of fear, paranoia, notes, and tasks, was it just a lesson? Frank chuckled. You see, new neighbor, the notes, the tests, they were meant to show you how much the HOA looks out for every detail, how much care goes into maintaining the neighborhood, and yes, to weed out those who don't take it seriously. I laughed nervously. So, the footprints, the midnight meetings, the terrifying instructions, all just lessons. Mrs. Henderson nodded. Exactly, and you passed. You observed, you documented, and you survived. Welcome officially to the HOA. Relief washed over me, and somehow I laughed. Nervously at first, then louder. I had survived the crooked mailbox, mysterious notes, midnight orientations, and the ultimate test of trust and paranoia. Somehow I had made it. Frank gave me a subtle nod of approval. Welcome to the real HOA, he said, grinning slightly this time. Now you know what it takes. As neighbors started returning to their routines, I looked around with new eyes. The streets seemed calmer now, yet still buzzing with quiet vigilance. The community wasn't perfect. No, it was obsessively perfect, but I understood it now. And somehow, amidst the absurdity, paranoia, and suspense, I felt part of something larger than myself. I glanced at my mailbox. Upright, gnomes aligned, trash bins properly placed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of pride in the chaos that had nearly broken me. Mrs. Henderson approached and placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. Remember, she said, eyes glinting, in this neighborhood, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. But you're ready. I nodded. Exhausted, exhilarated, and slightly traumatized, I finally understood the true power of the HOA. Keeping everyone on their toes, ensuring every detail mattered, and teaching lessons in patience, vigilance, and yes, absurdly dramatic suspense. And as I walked back to my house, I couldn't help but laugh. My quiet suburban life would never be quiet again, but somehow I wouldn't have it any other way. The HOA had claimed me, challenged me, and in a weird way welcomed me. And I had survived. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.